Tiny in All That Air, the Philip Larkin Society podcast.
Hello and welcome to Tiny in All That Air, the Philip Larkin Society podcast. My name is Lynn Lockwood and I am the PLS Deputy Chair. I can't quite believe we've reached our 5-year anniversary, but we have. So we've decided to put together a retrospective that takes a bit of a stroll down memory lane as opposed to Cemetery Road. This episode is not a best of Tiny in All That Air because that would actually be impossible. Every guest and every episode has contained many expected and unexpected delights, and everyone has been a learning curve for me as a podcaster. But I hope this gives a flavour of what the podcast is about, and it's meant as a celebration of what we have done for the last 5 years. I think every episode of Tiny has had a mixture of serious moments, exploration and thought, and then moments of light and laughter, and I hope this compilation reflects that. We never wanted the podcast to be a purely academic exercise. Instead, we wanted it to be a place for conversation, debate and discussion. I've grouped the clips into 3 sections. We begin with the poems themselves, some of the big hitters and some less well known, some read by our honorary vice presidents and some read by our members, trustees and listeners. The second section looks at some of Larkin's contemporaries. Here we focus on Kingsley Amis, Barbara Pym and Anthony Thwaite, all of whom had very different and special relationships with Larkin himself. The final section is Larkin Chat, some of the different interpretations and ideas that our varied guests and speakers have brought along. Some of the clips were nominated by trustees and members, and some feature essential figures in the story of the PLS and Larkin himself, such as Graham Chesters, James Booth and Dan Thwaite. The details are all in the show notes. We start the podcast with Professor Eddie Dawes, founding chairman of the PLS, who was my very first guest on the podcast back in 2019. And his reading of the trees in 2022 was also recorded in his beautiful house in Cottingham during the last time I spoke to him at length before he sadly passed away in the March of the following year. Eddie was a great supporter of the podcast and I find this recording of the trees profoundly moving. We end the collection with Rosie Millard, our current president, who brings along great knowledge, wit and a deep love of Larkin's work.
The trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said. The recent buds relax and spread. Their greenness is a kind of grief. Is it that they are born again as we grow old? No, they die too. Their yearly trick of looking new is written down in rings of grain. Still the unresting castles thresh, full-grown thickness every May. Last year is dead, they seem to say. Begin afresh, afresh, afresh.
I'm Graham Chesters and I'm the chair of the Philip Larkin Society. I would like to read what I think is Larkin's shortest poem, which has something of the haiku about it. This is the first thing I've understood. Time is the echo of an axe within a wood. The poem begins in the voice of an apprentice philosopher who feels delighted at having understood something, having unravelled some mystery of life. There's an excitement about that line. But what is it that is understood? The aphorism that follows isn't immediately obvious in its meaning. Indeed, it seems to me something like a riddle, so that the promise of understanding, which is offered to the reader in the first part, becomes compromised by the mysteriousness of the metaphor that lies behind the second half. It feels as though the reader is challenged to unravel the meaning in much the same way as the apprentice philosopher has. So what begins as a declaration of clarity and understanding ends for the reader in something much more obscure and mysterious.
Days. What are days for? Days are where we live. They come, they wake us time and time over. They are to be happy in. Where can we live but days? Solving that question brings the priest and the doctor in their long coats, running over the fields.
Broadcast by Philip Larkin. Giant whispering and coughing from vast Sunday-full and organ-frowned-on spaces precede a sudden scuttle on the drum. The Queen and huge resettling. Then begins a snivelling of the violins. I think of your face among all those faces, beautiful and devout before cascades of monumental slithering, one of your gloves unnoticed on the floor beside those new, slightly outmoded shoes. Here it goes quickly dark. I lose all but the outline of the still and withering leaves on half-emptied trees. Behind the glowing wave bands, rabid storms of chording, by being distant, overpower my mind, all the more shamelessly. Their cut-off shout leaving me desperate to pick out your hands, tiny in all that air, applauding.
High Windows by Philip Larkin. When I see a couple of kids and guess he's fucking her and she's taking pills or wearing a diaphragm, I know this is paradise everyone old has dreamed of all their lives. Bonds and gestures pushed to one side like an outdated combine harvester, and everyone young going down the long slide to happiness, endlessly. I wonder if anyone looked at me 40 years back and thought, that'll be the life, no God anymore, or sweating in the dark about hell and that, or having to hide what you think of the priest. He and his lot will all go down the long slide like free bloody birds. And immediately, rather than words, comes the thought of high windows, the sun-comprehending glass, and beyond it the deep blue air that shows nothing and is nowhere and is endless.
Dear audience, first I must apologize for my English, as I am a Dutch national and not a native English speaker. I stumbled upon Larkin in the early 90s, when I was in my 30s, and looking for some holiday poetry in an English bookshop, not knowing then that the poems would become life companions. At the time I understood only a few of them. Others opened up their meaning and beauty unexpectedly in later stages of life. They still help to unfold consciousness of myself and the world as I grow older. I've become very much attached to them, and they are very dear, as friends that know me well. In contrast with his popularity in Britain, in the Netherlands Larkin is still a treasure of the literary elite. Some quotes from his poems show up in works of Dutch writers as a sign of literacy. The Dutch poet Eikelboom translated 30 poems back in 1983, when Larkin was still with us. But the copy I have second-hand has been removed from a local public library, where it was borrowed not a single time. In 2003, a selection of 21 poems was translated again by a Dutch high school teacher. And, to my surprise, last year another high school teacher did all the poems from the 3 collections, trying to preserve meter, rhyme and accents. It was privately published. I am glad that Larkin's poetry speaks to me in English. Some of my favorite verses have not yet been translated in Dutch, like The Mower. But An April Sunday Brings the Snow has. I read this poem every time I want to recall what Proust calls temps perdu, time lost. It makes me aware how objects bring back feelings for people I have been with, because the objects were present themselves back then. I would like to read to you all this short poem in English and then in Dutch translation by Harry de Vries. Thank you for your attention, and thank you so much, Philip Larkin. An April Sunday brings the snow. An April Sunday brings the snow, making the blossom on the plum trees green, not white. An hour or two and it will go. Strange that I spend that hour moving between cupboard and cupboard, shifting the store of jam you made of fruit from these same trees. 5 loads, 100 pounds or more than enough for all next summer's teas, which now you will not sit and eat. Behind the glass, under the cellophane, remains your final summer, sweet and meaningless and not to come again. Sneeuw valt op een zondag in april. Sneeuw valt op een zondag in april en maakt de pruimenbloesem groen, niet wit. Met een uur of 2 is het weg. Het toeval wil dat ik die tijd met de verhuizing zit, van kast naar kast, van de voorraad door jou gemaakte jam uit fruit van diezelfde bomen. 5 partijen, een 100 pond al gauw, meer dan genoeg om de hele zomer die gaat komen te serveren bij de thee, waar je niet meer aan meedoet. Achter het glas, onder het cellofaan, resteren jouw laatste zomerdagen, zinloos en zoet, en om niet meer terug te keren.
My name is Richard Johnston, and I'm a professor at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I know that it's perhaps most common to think of Sad Steps as a reimagining of Philip Sidney's 31st sonnet from Astrophil and Stella, the sonnet that begins with "How sad steps, O moon, thou climb'st the skies." But I have found in teaching Larkin that it's often helpful to present the poem as a revisiting or reworking of the themes in Reasons for Attendance. In Reasons, the strength, the love, the youth, the romance, the possibility, all of that was close to the speaker. He could see it, he could hear it, he could imagine sensing it, smelling it, perhaps touching it. But in Sad Steps, it has been removed by a lifetime of choices and by age, and is now invisible and only barely imaginable. Sad Steps. Groping back to bed after a piss, I part thick curtains, and am startled by the rapid clouds, the moon's cleanliness. 4 o'clock. Wedge-shadowed gardens lie under a cavernous, a wind-picked sky. There's something laughable about this. The way the moon dashes through clouds that blow loosely as cannon smoke to stand apart, stone-colored light sharpening the roofs below, high and preposterous and separate, lozenge of love, medallion of art, oh, wolves of memory, immensement. No. One shivers slightly, looking up there. The hardness and the brightness and the plain, far-reaching singleness of that wide stare is a reminder of the strength and pain of being young, that it can't come again, but is for others undiminished somewhere. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sally Button, speaking to you from Nottingham. I first heard Philip Larkin's poem To the Sea on the Society's podcast in March this year, when Philip Pullen and Rachel Galeckley discussed significant poems in his life, with this one evoking memories of childhood seaside holidays. It resonated for me as my parents moved to Cotham, Redcar, or Redcar to the locals, when I was a baby until the age of 6, and our house overlooked the sand dunes and sea. I walked along the beach regularly with my mum and dad as soon as I could toddle. They set up a lookout at the bottom of our garden with little steps and a seat so that I could watch the sea. So my choice of poem to read is To the Sea. To step over the low wall that divides road from concrete walk above the shore brings sharply back something known long before. The miniature gaiety of seasides. Everything crowds under the low horizon. Steep beach, blue water, towels, red bathing caps, the small, hushed waves, repeated fresh collapse up the warm yellow sand, and further off, a white steamer stuck in the afternoon. Still going on, all of it, still going on. To lie, eat, sleep, in hearing of the surf, ears to transistors, that sound tame enough under the sky, or gently up and down lead the uncertain children, frilled in white and grasping at enormous air, or wheel the rigid old along for them to feel a final summer, plainly still occurs as half an annual pleasure, half a rite. As when, happy at being on my own, I searched the sand for famous cricketers, or, farther back, my parents, listeners to the same seaside quack first became known. Strange to it now, I watch the cloudless scene, the same clear water over smooth pebbles, the distant bathers' weak, protesting trebles down at its edge, and then the cheap cigars, the chocolate papers, tea leaves, and, between the rocks, the rusting soup tins, till the first few families start the trek back to the cars. The white steamer has gone. Like breathed-on glass, the sunlight has turned milky. If the worst of flawless weather is our falling short, it may be that through habit these do best, coming to water clumsily undressed yearly, teaching their children by a sort of clowning, helping the old too, as they ought.
The moment of truth. Now, I have no cycle clips, but I do have a cycling helmet, which I've removed in hopefully not too awkward of a show of reverence. Once I am sure there's nothing going on, I step inside, letting the door thud shut. Another church, matting, seats, and stone, and little books, sprawlings of flowers, cut for Sunday, brownish now, some brass and stuff up at the holy end, the small, neat organ, and a tense, musty, unignorable silence brewed God knows how long. Hatless, I take off my cycle clips in awkward reverence, move forward, run my hand around the font. From where I stand, the roof looks almost new, cleaned or restored. Someone would know. I don't. Mounting the lectern, I peruse a few hectoring, large-scale verses and pronounce, "Here endeth," much more loudly than I'd meant. The echoes snigger briefly. Back at the door, I sign the book, donate an Irish sixpence, reflect the place was not worth stopping for. Yet stop I did. In fact, I often do, and always end much at a loss like this, wondering what to look for, wondering too, when churches fall completely out of use, what we shall turn them into. If we shall keep a few cathedrals chronically on show, their parchment, plate, and pyx in locked cases, and let the rest rent free to rain and sheep, shall we avoid them as unlucky places? Or, after dark, will dubious women come to make their children touch a particular stone, pick simples for a cancer, or on some advised night see walking a dead one? Power of some sort or other will go on, in games, in riddles, seemingly at random. But superstition, like belief, must die, and what remains when disbelief has gone? Grass, weedy pavement, brambles, buttress, sky. A shape less recognizable each week. A purpose more obscure. I wonder who will be the last, the very last, to seek this place for what it was. One of the crew that tap and jot and know what rude lofts were? Some ruin bibber, randy for antique, or Christmas addict, counting on a whiff of gown and bands and organ pipes and myrrh? Or will he be my representative, bored, uninformed, knowing the ghostly silt dispersed, yet tending to this cross of ground through suburb scrub, because it held unspilt so long and equably what since is found only in separation, marriage, and birth, and death, and thoughts of these for which was built this special shell. For, though I've no idea what this accoutred frowsty barn is worth, it pleases me to stand in silence here. A serious house, on serious earth it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies, and that much never can be obsolete. Since someone will forever be surprising a hunger in himself to be more serious, and gravitating with it to this ground, which he once heard was proper to grow wise in. If only that so many dead lie round.
Cut grass. Cut grass lies frail. Brief is the breath mown stalks exhale. Long, long the death it dies in the white hours of young-leafed June, with chestnut flowers, with hedges snow-like strewn, white lilac bowed, lost lanes of Queen Anne's lace, and that high builded cloud moving at summer's pace.
The old fools. What do they think has happened, the old fools, to make them like this? Do they somehow suppose it's more grown up when your mouth hangs open and drools and you keep on pissing yourself and can't remember who called this morning? Or that, if they only choose, they could alter things back to when they danced all night, or went to their wedding, or sloped arms some September? Or do they fancy there's really been no change, and they've always behaved as if they were crippled or tight, or sat through days of thin, continuous dreaming, watching light move? And if they don't, and they can't, it's strange. Why aren't they screaming? At death, you break up. The bits that were you start speeding away from each other forever, with no one to see. It's only oblivion. True, we had it before, but then it was going to end, and was all the time merging with a unique endeavour to bring to bloom the million-petaled flower of being here. Next time, you can't pretend there'll be anything else. And these are the first signs: not knowing how, not hearing who, the power of choosing gone. Their looks show that they're for it. Ash hair, toed hands, prune face dried into lines. How can they ignore it? Perhaps being old is having lighted rooms inside your head and people in them, acting. People you know, yet can't quite name. Each looms like a deep loss restored, from known doors turning, setting down a lamp, smiling from a stare, extracting a known book from the shelves, or sometimes only the rooms themselves, chairs and a fire burning, the blown bush at the window, or the sun's faint friendliness on the wall, some lonely, rain-ceased midsummer evening. That is where they live, not here and now, but where all happened once. This is why they give an air of baffled absence, trying to be there, yet being here. For the rooms grow farther, leaving incompetent cold, the constant wear and tear of taken breath, and them crouching below extinction's alp, the old fools, never perceiving how near it is. This must be what keeps them quiet, the peak that stays in view wherever we go, for them is rising ground. Can they never tell what is dragging them back and how it will end? Not at night, not when the strangers come, never throughout the whole hideous inverted childhood? Well, we shall find out.
That's the show round here, but I wasn't thinking so much about that. But another place that I went to that had a couple of the things in it that Larkin talks about in Show Saturday. Show Saturday is about going to the show in, must pronounce this right, Bellingham. That's how you say it. I was forever saying it Bellingham, pronouncing it Bellingham, but apparently it's Bellingham. Anyway, near Hexham and near Hayden Bridge, where Monica, of course, had her home. They went to the show often. Once she told they'd go and visit the show in the summer. Mm-hmm. I had a slightly similar experience in the sense that in the summer we went to an open day at a Buddhist centre near Pocklington, not very far away from us. It's not an agricultural show, but it was a place where lots of people were outdoors, and there were stalls and there were things going on. And it was great to be able to get back to that bit of humanity again, having been so locked in, to see people outside enjoying themselves on, on a relatively nice day. And that brought me to Show Saturday, which I think is a great poem. So it's a long one to read, so you'll have to bear with me on this one. Show Saturday. Grey day for the show, but cars jam the narrow lanes. Inside, on the field, judging has started. Dogs set their legs back, hold out their tails, and ponies, manes repeatedly smoothed to calm heads. Over there, sheep, Cheviot and Blackface. By the hedge, squealing logs, chainsaw competition. Each has its own keen crowd. In the main area, more judges meet by a jeep. The jumping's on next. Announcements, splutteringly loud, clash with the quack of a man with pound notes round his hat and a lit-up board. There's more than just animals. Bead stalls, balloon men, a bank, a beer marquee that half screens a canvassed gents. A tent selling tweed and another jackets. Folks sit about on bales like great straw dice. For each scene is linked by spaces not given to anything much, where kids scrap, freed, while their owners stare different ways with incurious faces. The wrestling starts, late. A wide ring of people, then cars, then trees, then pale sky. Two young men in acrobats' tights and embroidered trunks hug each other, rock over the grass, stiff-legged in a two-man scrum. One falls, they shake hands. Two more start, one grey-haired, he wins though. They're not so much fights as long immobile strainings that end in unbalance, with one on his back, unharmed, while the other stands smoothing his hair. But there are other talents. The long high tent of growing and making, wired off wood tables past which crowds shuffle, eyeing the scrubbed, spaced extrusions of earth, blanched leeks like church candles, 6 pods of broad beans, one split open, dark shining leafed cabbages of single supreme versions, followed on laced paper mats by dairy and kitchen, 4 brown eggs, 4 white eggs, 4 plain scones, 4 dropped scones, pure excellencies that enclose a recession of skills. And after them, lambing sticks, rugs, needlework, knitted caps, baskets, all worthy, all well done, but less than the honeycombs. Outside, the jumping's over. The young ones thunder their ponies in competition twice round the ring. Then trick races, musical stalls, sliding off, riding bareback. The ponies drag to and fro for bewildering requirements, not minding. But now, in the background, like shifting scenery, horse boxes move. Each crawls towards the stock entrance, tilting and swaying, bound for far-off farms. The pound note man decamps. The car park has thinned. They're loading jumps on a truck. Back now to private addresses, gates and lamps in high stone one-street villages, empty at dusk, and side roads of small towns, sports finals stuck in front doors, allotments reaching down to the railway. Back now to autumn, leaving the ended husk of summer that brought them here for Show Saturday. The men with hunters, dog-breeding, wool-defined women, children all saddle swag, mug-faced middle-aged wives glaring at jellies, husbands on leave from the garden, watchful as weasels, car-tuning, curt-haired sons. Back now, all of them, to their local lives, to names on vans and business calendars hung up in kitchens, back to loud occasions in the corn exchange, to market days in bars, to winter coming, as a dismantled show itself dies back into the area of work. Let it stay hidden there like strength, below sale bills and swindling. Something people do, not noticing how time's rolling smithy smoke shadows much greater gestures. something they share that breaks ancestrally each year into regenerate union. Let it always be there. Isn't it a fantastic poem?
I love that final line.
My bit is the opening of Excellent Women, because it concludes with one of my favourite quotes, which also is a literary awareness sort of thing, which is always good for an essay. Undergraduate. if the author ever talks about writing, always use that bit. But I could read that bit.
I think Excellent Women is, I know you said Crampton Hodder is the gateway, but I do, for me, not being so familiar with Barbara Pym, when I reread it this year, it kind of felt to me really quintessential Barbara Pym, actually, in lots of ways.
Mm-hmm. It is, when people talk about Pym, it's often Excellent Women that they're thinking of, in a way.
Yeah,
it does come back, and partly because of the first person narrator of Mildred.
Yeah, because Mildred is so associated.
She's so closely allied with Pym herself.
Yeah, yeah. So you're going to read the opening?
I'll read the opening.
That's brilliant.
Are you ladies always on the spot when there's something happening? This voice belonged to Mr. Mallet, one of our church wardens, and its roguish tone made me start guiltily, almost as if I had no right to be discovered on my own front door. New people moving in? The presence of a furniture van would seem to suggest it, he went on pompously. I expect you know all about it. Well, yes, one usually does, I said, feeling rather annoyed at his presumption. It's rather difficult not to know such things. I suppose as an unmarried woman just over 30 who lives alone and has no apparent ties, one must expect to find oneself involved or interested in other people's business. And if she's also a clergyman's daughter, then one really might say there's no hope for her. Well, well, tempus fugit, as the poet says, called out Mr. Mallet as he hurried on. I had to agree that it did, but I dawdled long enough to see the furniture men set down a couple of chairs on the pavement. And as I walked up the stairs to my flat, I heard the footsteps of a person in the empty room below me, pacing about on the bare boards, deciding where each piece should go. Mrs. Napier, I thought, for I had noticed a letter addressed to somebody of that name, marked to await arrival. But now that she had materialised, I felt perversely that I did not want to see her, so I hurried into my own rooms and began tidying out the kitchen. I met her for the first time by the dustbins later that afternoon. The dustbins were in the basement and everybody in the house shared them. There were offices on the ground floor and above them the two flats, not properly self-contained and without every convenience. I have to share a bathroom, I have so often murmured, almost with shame, as if I personally had been found unworthy of a bathroom of my own. I bent low over the bin and scrabbled a few tea leaves and potato peelings out of the bottom of my bucket. I was embarrassed that we should meet like this. I had meant to ask Mrs. Napier for coffee one evening. It was to have been a gracious, civilised occasion, with my best coffee cups and biscuits on little silver dishes. And now, here I was, standing awkwardly in my oldest clothes, carrying a bucket and a waste paper basket. Mrs. Napier spoke first. You must be Miss Latbury, she said abruptly. I've seen your name on one of the doorbells. Yes, I live in the flat above yours. I do hope you're getting comfortably settled in. Moving is such a business, isn't it? It seems to take so long to get everything straight. Some essential, like a teapot or a frying pan, is always lost. Platitudes flowed easily from me, perhaps because with my parochial experience, I know myself to be capable of dealing with most of the stock situations, or even the great moments of life. Birth, marriage, death, the successful jumble sale, the garden fete spoilt by bad weather. Mildred is such a help to her father, people used to say after my mother died. It would be nice to have someone else in the house, I ventured, for during the last year of the war, my friend Dora Caldecott and I had been the only occupants. and I've been quite alone for the past month since Dora left to take up a teaching post in the country. Oh, well, I don't suppose I shall be in very much, said Mrs. Napier quickly. Oh, no, I said, drawing back, neither shall I. In fact, I was very often in, but understood her reluctance to pledge herself to anything that might become a nuisance or a tie. We were, superficially at any rate, a very unlikely pair to become friendly. She was fair-haired and pretty, gaily dressed in corduroy trousers and a bright jersey, while I, mousy and rather plain anyway, drew attention to these qualities with my shapeless overall and old fawn skirt. Let me hasten to add that I am not at all like Jane Eyre, who must have given hope to so many plain women who tell their stories in the first person, nor have I ever thought to myself as being like her. I love the Jane Eyre. It's just when you think you might have a handle on the kind of person this is and the kind of way it's going, she calls you out on it. No, just you wait and see.
I'm not Jane Eyre. It reminds me of the opening of Catcher in the Rye, where he says, I'm not David Copperfield. I'm not going to write all that rubbish.
Yeah, this is what you're going to get.
Yeah, we're going to do something different. And I do... What always strikes me about Barbara Pym, and also reading Larkin as well, is, you know, I was born in 1970, and so I didn't grow up in that generation where the level of formality was so high in the way that people addressed each other in their society. You know, I mean, obviously not everybody in the UK, but, you know, there was this real level of formality, and still calling people Mr. and Mrs., you know, and you'd call your husband Mr. So-and-so in company. And there were very complex kind of rules about how you behaved. I mean, a lot of this story is about who's getting married to who, isn't it? And you know, the problem of Mildred not being married, and how they might solve that problem. Not that she wants to particularly, but it seems like there's pressure. Or
how other people can usefully employ her.
Yeah, what can she do as an unmarried? Yeah,
she makes tea, she arranges for furniture removals.
Oh, they put so much on her, don't they? They expect so much of her.
And then nasty old Allegra Gray angles for the vicar, and then suggests very strongly that the vicar's sister moves out to the vicarage with Mildred so they can be, you know, two lonely old women together.
Yeah. And they make this assumption that she wanted to marry the vicar, and she's constantly saying, I never wanted.
I've never had any aspirations to the vicar. But was it Larkin says that in it, because I think it's a very painful novel. It's a very painful novel. Well, it's a very funny novel. And Larkin says, Mildred's like an old Victorian cab horse. Everyone sees that she's suffering. It's a very obvious thing, but no one questions why or whether they should do something about it. It's almost like a condition of life. You know?
Yeah.
She's a spinster, therefore she will suffer.
It'd be really great to talk a little bit about how the birth of this amazing book came about, because obviously it was written by Amos, but he was taking each part of the idea to Larkin, or Larkin seemed to be intricately involved with some of that early concepts. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There was the visit to the common room, the faculty room at Leicester, and he looked at it and he thought there was lots to develop here, and it was a rich vein of comedy could be dug out of it. But Larkin was crucial to it in several other ways. It's Larkin who is responsible for the relationship between Jim Dixon, the hero of the novel, and Margaret, the woman with whom he's going around, but for reasons he doesn't fully understand, and whose affectations, whose pretension drive him sort of mad. A lot of Margaret is really taken verbatim from the things that Larkin told him about his girlfriend, the sort of longest lived of his relationships, but also the most problematic in some ways, with Monica Jones, a lecturer at the University of Leicester. So the situation between Margaret and Dixon owes much to Larkin's account of his relationship with Monica Jones. Now, this relationship may not be as it was recounted to Amos. It was recounted to Amos for Amos.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
In some ways, it does not. In some ways, it does not reflect. Certainly, doesn't reflect the correspondence between Larkin and Monica Jones. But you could see. I mean, she could see herself in this relationship, and was deeply hurt by it. Apparently, took to her bed and was drunk for a week because of it. And said something, John Sutherland, who's written a book about Monica Jones and Larkin and himself, he was a student of Monica Jones, said to me, I haven't yet read his book, but he said to me that, he said something like, I thought I was too insignificant to be humiliated like this, something like this. Larkin said he was very angry when this appeared in Dixon and Christine. And he asked a few things to be cut, but it was absolutely clear that what he allowed to go through was material that was going to hurt Monica Jones, and he didn't want it to go through. Anyway, so there's that. So that's something else. So the whole idea of doing a campus novel, in effect, really the first campus novel, came from the visit to Larkin. The Margaret episode was there. And then when Dixon and Christine was finished, the first draft, and Amos sent it off to publishers and they rejected it, then Larkin read it. And in addition to being angry about a couple of bits that involved the Monica Jones character, particularly about her political views, he had the crucial bit of good advice for Amos. He said, you have to sod up the romantic element, by which he meant make the blocking figures for the hero, Jim Dixon, more like monsters and dragons. Don't show a jot of sympathy for them, which is what was the case in Dixon and Christine. In Dixon and Christine, there's more than one point of view. Margaret gets a point of view. There are other characters who do. He said, make the whole thing focused on Jim Dixon and his success. And then it's like a comedy or a romance. The blocking figures are overcome. He gets the girl in the end. They go off into the sunset, and it's terrific. And Amos himself saw the importance of this. He described the novel after making the sorts of alterations that Larkin suggested. He said it's about a young man at odds with his surroundings and trying to make his way and suffering comic misfortunes and getting the girl. It can't fail, really. It can't fail, really.
Philip Larkin in New Orleans. Suppose he had come here 2 days after Mardi Gras, the wrong time. It would be raining, in sheets up from the delta, the banquets awash and the gutters running with all the festival trash, laughing gas capsules, confetti, a tinsel star, cheap beads, purple and golden and green, bottle caps, condoms, masks. Somewhere too far, somewhere too foreign. He would be complaining this wasn't the dream he had had, the dream place he'd been, tapping his feet in a bar in Bourbon or Basin, the moan of riverboats drifting through the Vieux Carré, mingling with a familiar saxophone, and the girls stepping out on the streets at the end of the day. His Crescent City is much further off, a paradise where love and trumpets play in tune and out of time beyond belief in ordinary days or usual grief, a place in which all doubt is put away. Tonight I caught his authentic other note, fixed, finite, steady in its monotone, as I passed an old black with a graveyard cough, an empty bottle, a funereal hat, who muttered something as he cleared his throat, trembled, and battered off the rain, and spat, somewhere between Decatur and Wilk Row, his hopes expelled with an enormous no.
Was that something that you and Anthony talked about before he wrote it? Did you have a conversation?
Yes. I mean, we were in New Orleans. This is when Anthony was teaching for 2 semesters at Nashville. And we took a holiday in the long break on the Mississippi, going up paddle steamer. We love New Orleans. In fact, I had the great pleasure of being, I was giving a lecture at the University of Southern Mississippi, and they were going to meet me at the airport. And I said, no, you'll have to meet me at the docks, because we were coming back from Mississippi. But that was a great time. And it was that, the time of the Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
And we bought that bird.
You bought the bird in New Orleans?
Yeah.
That's a big thing to bring back. Well done for keeping it in one piece.
I can't judge his poetry, except that I know he would bring, no, I'm going to put a drop of water on. He would bring poem in and say, what is it in mine? And I think, fancy, I see that, but I've never thought of it in that way. Something, I don't know, the Marks and Spencer one, or something like that. Well, no, I'll let you.
When you say you're no judge of his poetry, I mean.
Well, I mean, I'm not an English scholar. I'm not. There's plenty more milk I can break.
No, that's fine. That's legitimate. But then, I mean, the poem like "We Met at the End of the Party." When you got that, were you not moved by it? Did you not? Did it give you a thrill? Did it make you feel?
I suppose so. I mean, I can't remember. He comes in and it says here. What the things that? Oh, this is for you, or something like that.
So did you do that often? Have you got many other poems then?
Well, no, not a lot. One or two others. But
there are one or two others.
Yes, but I'm not going into them. I'm not going to delve into them.
Are there copies of them somewhere else in case?
Oh, no, I don't think so. Well, I don't know. I didn't know that this wasn't in one of his workbooks.
No.
But I think that it.
But it was in one of the workbooks, but it's this workbook that's gone missing.
Is it?
Well, it's the one that Chris Jackson turned up. That's where it is. It's not in any of the regular workbooks. No. And I think that poems that Philip wrote to you, quite possibly, he wouldn't have put in his regular workbook. So if there are other poems in letters to you, I would have thought it was quite important that.
Well,
you make a photocopy and get it lodged somewhere in the library under lock and key that no one can.
We didn't write letters to each other. I mean, I used to leave him notes when I was going on holiday. This, that, no, on the typewriter, and he would. Well, one of them says, "Goodbye." For me to come back to, and there's a sandcastle with a flag stuck in it, and he was off to the seaside, you see. Just a little drawing, because he was quite good at that.
But if there are other poems, it's terribly important that there's
Not
more.
really.
There's more, or if there are letters and these other kinds of
No,
Valentines and whatever.
I haven't got. We didn't write letters like he and
But
me.
there must be one or two, because we met at the end of the parties being one, isn't it?
And we should have saved the postcards that he sent to the library staff, you
Yes.
know. They just went in, everybody on holiday sent a postcard. They were all put up in the staff room. And then, I don't know what happened to
Thrown
them.
away at the end.
Probably.
Yes.
When everybody was back from the holidays and term started.
But it is important, Betty. I mean, I'll say this again. It is important if you've got papers which Larkin wrote, which might have anything of interest in. Even if you don't want anyone to read them, you can easily put an embargo on people reading them. But make sure there's a copy somewhere else, because if this place, well, God forbid, if this place burnt down, it's very important there is a copy somewhere else, just in case.
Well, there's this book, isn't there?
Yes, but it may be. I mean, we met at the end of the party. Might have disappeared completely. It might have, if you'd thrown it away, or if it had got burnt up or whatever. And it is, I think, one of his very best poems of the later period. It's a really good poem. Do you realise how good it is?
I realise how good it is, because it's not twee.
No, exactly. That's exactly it.
I mean, you can read so much into that, can't you?
Yeah. And the craftsmanship that's gone into it is really subtle.
Yes.
The half rhymes.
Yes.
And the and the delicate short cut he makes to getting at the theme, which is a really big, powerful theme, and yet one which is very original. I mean, no one else would have written a poem like that.
No.
And he couldn't have written it to anyone else but you. That's the point.
Captain Beefheart was a huge fan of Philip Larkin. Is that known in the Larkin world?
No. Well, I don't think so. I don't know.
So Captain Beefheart is the most extraordinary musician who was active from like When was Safe as Well 1966 to about 1984?
I think Troutmask is 69 and the later he kind of retired early 80s, I think. Yeah.
Well, in the period of his retirement when he was just painting, so he's an extraordinary painter. He gave a few interviews, and I'll read you their very short quotes. So the first one is from January 1988, Spin magazine, and the interviewer asks him, amongst lots of strange questions like, what are your favourite smells? And is it true that your father drove a Helms Bakery truck for 25 years? The interviewer says, you've said that it's highly unlikely you'll ever record another album of music. Is there a possibility you might record a spoken word album of you reading some of your writings? And Captain Beefheart replies, that's quite possible, but it's a frightening idea. I get scared to death when I recite. Even the thought of it makes my mouth dry. Poetry is scary to me. I think Philip Larkin may be the best poet I've ever read. And this is a guy living in the Mojave Desert in a trailer.
Wow.
And then the next interview is from 1991. The interviewer says, your favourite poet is Philip Larkin? And Captain Beefheart says, oh yeah, absolutely. You know, Larkin worked as a librarian in Hull, England, and he loved jazz. The interviewer then says, have you ever read his music reviews? He loved Duke Ellington and Count Basie, but he hated Charlie Parker. He thought bebop was gibberish. To which Captain Beefheart replies, yeah, well, the best he could do was dig music that cantered around the room. But did you ever hear someone talk about musicians like Philip Larkin? Use such grisly language? I've been reading a lot of Larkin. It's funny, the things you find when you retire. And then finally, they're talking about his paintings. And this is from Melody Maker in 1989 by David Frick. And it's sort of one of those ones where it's not direct question and answer, but the interviewer is basically summarising a phone call. And the sort of the observation is about his painting and that he's not making music anymore. And Philip Larkin said, Captain Beefheart says, I'm the music I'm making when I'm painting. I'm doing the same thing. But I'll tell you one thing, I sure as hell ain't going to be no writer. You know who I like? Philip Larkin. The best poet that ever lived. Good God. He said, and looking out to see the moon thinned to an air-sharpened blade. Is that frightening? I love that, because that's from Vers de Société. And the idea that Captain Beefheart was like bowled over, was frightened by how good Philip Larkin's description of the moon was.
Well, that is quite a kind of Beefheartian image, isn't it?
Totally,
The moon looked like a dandelion.
Sidney Bechet at the moment is, I feel like I'm sharing the house with Sidney Bechet at the moment because I'm reading my second book about him. But I remember when we went to Hull, and we've been to Hull many times together and had a little wander around and done Larkin related things and followed the plaque.
Yeah, and gone to the pubs.
Gone to the pubs.
The Old Black Boy.
And did we read for Sidney Bechet out loud to ourselves?
I think
in
we
the Old
did.
Black Boy? Because that's where he used to meet sometimes for jazz clubs, didn't he?
Yeah, well, we tried to go to one of the others, but it was closed.
Oh,
Is
the
it
White
Horse? Is it the White?
Something like
Yeah.
White Hart.
Hart.
I think we went to the wrong one because there's
That's it.
two pubs called the White Hart, isn't
okay,
there?
whoops.
But then we ended up in it because it's that one with the funny little courtyard. It's that really dark one.
Oh,
Do you
right,
remember?
yeah.
That's the old
we
White
went to that on a
Hart.
different occasion.
We did go to it at
that
a
was,
different time.
That was pretty rowdy. It was a Saturday
quite
night,
a rowdy
wasn't it?
pub.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you remember my sister speaking to the two of us about something to put on her wedding invitations.
Yeah.
And you'd suggested, on me, your voice falls, as they say, love should, like an enormous yacht.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that then became her you know, her email, like an enormous yes.
Oh, is it?
I think that she used that for her wedding,
right.
you know, to people to contact about the wedding details. So yeah, our influences sort of spread out amongst our loved ones. I mean, Matt often talks about my partner. Matt often talks about, you know, Larkin being the other man in the relationship.
Yeah, Gavin's
that as well,
complained about that.
Yeah, because we've got a huge poster of him in our lounge, you know, and then various different kind of tapestries and photographs and pictures. But he's joined in now for Christmas. He bought me a beautiful print of the different, a sort of slim section of each of the different first edition copies of each of Larkin's published works.
Yeah.
You know, that's in my bedroom, but
that's a really beautiful present.
Yeah.
No, we've
Beautiful.
finally we've got him into shape, haven't we? We've got him where we need him to be.
That's right.
Maybe sort of put it into the context of what Larkin was doing at the time.
Yeah.
And I think you suggested it'd be interesting to look at the period from like 64 to 74.
Yeah.
So 64 was when the Whitsun Weddings was published, and then 1974 we've got High Windows. So I mean, one thing to note about that is it takes a long time to get a Larkin volume out, doesn't it? Really, he takes age. He did take ages to get something to publication as a volume.
If I can just interject there, Phil, Clive James says in when he's doing a review of High Windows, not exactly a torrent of creativity, just the best. But just the best.
Yeah, there you go. I think that sums it up quite well, really. But I thought, I mean, maybe because they've been in the news quite a lot recently. I would sort of start with the context of this by looking at the Beatles to some degree, because in 1964 the Beatles were kind of getting towards their zenith, weren't they? There was, and we know from what Maeve Brennan tells us, at least, that Larkin enjoyed listening to the Beatles, or some of the Beatles. He had one or two of their albums, for example, Please Please Me, the one which finds its way into a poem. Maeve Brennan, in her autobiography, talks about Larkin falling under the sway of the Beatles, and refers to the fact that it was sufficient to give him a memorable refrain in Annus Mirabilis, which of course is one of the poems that he included in High Windows. You know, that famous line between the end of the Chatterley Band and the Beatles' first LP. And she talks about the 60s being very happy years for Philip and for me. That's quoting her. And she highlights some of the things which were going on in his life, the sort of happy moments, I suppose. The Whitsun Weddings was a great success, and it really sort of took him off in the poetic world, didn't it? And there was the television documentary in 64, Down Cemetery Way with John Betjeman. So he was getting a little bit of a TV presence as well, though he didn't follow it up. And he was awarded the Queen's Gold Medal for poetry. So it was a great success, though I think Maeve possibly overstates Larkin's happiness, because there were other things going on which were not so good for him. But actually, if we just stick with the Beatles for a minute, I don't know, I've been pondering on this, and I don't know whether this is right or not, but I like to think of the Whitsun Weddings as this kind of Sergeant Pepper moment, you know, in terms of how that hits you and the various things that are going on there, and the real buzz you get from reading those poems. And with High Windows, we're more of the White Album.
Yeah.
You know, we've got these bits that are much harder to get into, you know, and if you've been waiting 10 years from the Whitsun Weddings for this next, you know, bit of Larkin, it's very different, isn't it, in some respects, parts of it. And it doesn't hold together quite in the same way. Although there's a lot in it when you get under the surface.
Unpick it, yeah.
And you know, I think there's a degree more of unhappiness within that in some of the poems. There's certainly that image of that feeling of getting older, and friendships developing and changing. It's a period where the complications in his relationship with Monica Jones and Maeve Brennan was happening in the background. But he's also making new friendships at the time. This was the period, for example, where he was championing Barbara Pym and becoming a great friend of Barbara Pym. And interestingly, he told Pym in one letter that poetry had deserted him. So there's also this challenge that he's got with where his poetry was going. I think James Booth refers to the fact that the Whitsun Weddings if I can find it. Let me find it. Sorry. He argues that Larkin's prime blossomed and faded within the period of the Whitsun Weddings poem. So after that, he was struggling much more poetically. He also redeveloped his friendship with Winifred Dawson, partly as a result of something. I think he appeared on a radio program, Larkin at 50, in 1972. Do you imagine that? I don't think that would happen now, would it? I mean, we haven't had an Armitage at 50 moment.
No.
And I don't think we'll have a Sewart at 50 moment.
It's too late.
It's too late. There we go. Too late, Chris. Yeah. But Larkin, you know, there was something about him being 50 that seemed to be significant. But there were various things going on in his life that I saw the background to this. And I thought there was a telling... I've been looking at the unpublished letters to Monica for another project, and I came across something that he wrote to Monica Jones in February 1963. So this is before actually the publication of the Whitsun Weddings. And he said, I spent the evening in writing exactly 10 words in about 75 minutes. The lava flow of genius. Lava, come back to me. That's all Larkin's, you know. But basically everything that goes on in Larkin's head and the amusement of that. But he was struggling with that. But I think probably the most important feature in his life that I think reflects some of the poetry in High Windows is the declining health of his mother, because he has such a strong relationship with his mother. And in the early 1970s, in 1972 to be exact, she went into a nursing home and quickly began suffering from dementia, and so that connection with her was changing, fading away to some degree. And then, of course, she died in 1977, so 3 years after publication. So there was quite a lot of differing things going on in Larkin's life. And perhaps the other thing to say is that he did kind of exert this feeling that he was getting old.
Yeah, and he wasn't really getting old at all. He was 48, 49, 50, and
by 1964 he was in his 40s, right? And he compared it. He literally, and I think it was in a letter to Monica Jones. He also, I remember in the tape recording he made with his mother, he refers to the 40s being the end of what he called the great fillet steak of life. He went on, after that, you're down to the poorer cuts. And so, no, he had that sense that, you know, going into the 40s, the best was over.
Right, let's hear solo. It is solo you're doing, isn't it?
Yeah. So it kind of takes us, it's another poem. It's a bit like Cut Grass. Obviously, it focuses on the natural world, and another astonishing poem. Solar, suspended lion face, spilling at the centre of an unfurnished sky. How still you stand, and how unaided single stalkless flower you pour unrecompensed. The eye sees you simplified by distance into an origin, your petalled head of flames continuously exploding. Heat is the echo of your gold. Coined there among lonely horizontals, you exist openly. Our needs hourly climb and return like angels. Unclosing like a hand, you give forever.
What a great poem.
Yeah, what an amazing poem. Do you know what's nice about this poem? It doesn't rhyme, so you don't get so tricked up. Sometimes I find Larkin quite hard to read. Well, poetry is hard to read sometimes out loud, but I find this one there's something kind of natural about it, even though it's a very stylized poem and very like heightened language. Actually, to read, it's quite a gentle poem to read.
Great poem, and it's opposite on the page, Sad Stuff, which is about the moon.
Yeah,
and yeah, well, we're not talking about that one, but that's all kind of painful and cold. This is warm and life affirming and just wonderful, spilling at the center of an unfurnished sky. Yeah. I mean, to talk about, the sky, the lack of stars in the day, what a brilliant way of putting that. I mean,
an unfurnished sky.
Unfurnished sky. God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's just wonderful. And but the depth of imagination for the metaphors for the sun, lion face, flower, petal, coin, angel. What are the coined there among lonely horizontals? Is that us?
I thought I kind of thought of it as like the kind of what tracks along the sky, like it is a horizontal world at times, clouds and what we see on the horizon. That's kind of where I was seeing it, and then the sun cuts through all of that because it's round, and I don't know, clouded.
There might be clouds.
Yeah, coined there among lonely horizontals. I mean, that's a coinage in itself, isn't it? Horizontals. I don't know if that really is a word.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't know. It is an absolutely masterful poem.
That again, the synesthesia, heat is the echo of your gold, that you can feel an echo. But you know exactly what he means by that.
Continuously exploding.
Yeah.
That is, and of course, can we say with justification that Larkin is writing this at the actual centre of the space race of it was still going on in the early 70s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Apollo missions.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we were in the 60s and 70s. We were seeing the kind of universe in a different way, weren't we? Because of technological advances. Like some people have said, it's kind of like a pagan kind of tribute almost.
Yeah, you give forever, you pour unrecompensed. It continuously exploding. It's giving, it's giving, it's giving. It's not being recompensed.
To encapsulate the sun as an origin, it's like the ultimate origin, isn't it? It's the origin of everything, but it's like an origin. It's not the origin of it. I mean, it is from which we all originate, isn't it? The sun, it's given us the energy, but the fact it's an origin, again, I think there's some that makes it quite pagan, that there may be other suns out there doing the same kind of thing.
It's very pagan, but then you have the angels at the end.
Yeah, you do. But what are angels? I mean, people do say that angels are pagan ideas. They're kind of these strange immortal beings that aren't really, they're not gods, they're not people either.
They're our needs hourly climb and return like angels. So when we wake up, we do our, we have our day and then we go back again. And
yeah. In the drafting process, instead of hourly, he first put daily and he changed it to hourly. And I think there's something about the sound of hourly, the vowels in there. Our needs exist hourly, because daily is a bit of a harsher sound, and the day is very much about that kind of day and night. It divides it up, doesn't it? But hours aren't divided into day and night; they're continual, and it's all. It doesn't matter where you are on Earth, somewhere the sun is doing this, even if you can't see it.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Honestly, I think this is my favourite poem from all the ones we've discussed today. Just wonderful.
Suspended lime face. I love that. It's one of those lines I always remember. Gav said to me the other day, "What one are you doing?" And I said, "Solar." He said, "Which one's that?" And I said, "Suspended lime face." He's like, "Oh, yeah." That's all you need to know about that poem.
You quote Philip Larkin every morning.
Yeah, that's our normal conversation, yeah.
Oh, blimey. I think that's terrific.
I hope you've enjoyed this compilation. I'd just like to say a few words of thanks. I'd like to say thank you to Mr. Simon Galloway, our producer, who is always there at the end of the PLS batline. I just project a giant image of Larkin's face up in the sky over Sheffield, and he dons his tech cape and sets things right for us. Thank you to Mr. Gavin Hogg, my lovely husband, who has travelled miles with me to interview people and will always be there to plug in their headphones when I say I can't hear anything. Thank you to the British Library for adding us to your digital archive, which ensures Tiny will outlive us all. Thank you to Daniel Vince and Clarissa Hard for the support for the podcast via our newsletter and journal. Thank you to the PLS trustees and members for their unwavering support. I would like to give a particular thanks to our chair, Graham Chesters, who is always at the end of the phone when I need words of wisdom or just someone to listen to me when I need to have a rant. And thank you for anyone who has ever emailed, liked, shared or otherwise contributed. And there are very many of you. And thank you everyone for listening. I'll leave you with another essential ingredient of the podcast, and that is Wes Finch and the Mechanicals Band, whose music has been our theme and calling card right from the start. We usually play out with The Horns of the Morning, but this time I'm going to end on The Trees, to bring us full circle with Eddie's reading at the top, and to remind us of the importance of creativity and growth in all projects like this.
Hello, this is Wes from the Mechanicals Band, and this is our setting of Philip Larkin's poem The Trees. I love especially the line, "And still the unresting castles thresh in full-grown thickness every May." Wonderful stuff. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
Trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said. The recent buds relax and spread, their greenness is a kind of grief. Is it that they are born again, and we grow old? No, they die too. Their yearly trick of looking new is written down in rings of grain. Yet still the unresting castles thresh in full-grown thickness every May. Last year is dead, they seem to say. Begin afresh, afresh, afresh. The trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said. Recent buds relax and spread, their greenness is a kind of grief. The trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said.